I'm Richard Charles Paterson, born 6th of August 1960.
So for those of you who don't know him, meet Richard Paterson, or Uncle Rich. This legend is the reason ballistics started in the first place, and this is one of 3 episodes on ballistics history for anyone who's interested in where we came from and how we got here.
I'm not photogenic, I can't do that.
I'm taking photo, I'm videoing.
Oh, yeah. Oh man, you're a wanker. Yeah, so I had a very stable environment, brought up in Cedarn Heights in Wellington, overlooking the beautiful Windsurfing Bay. I had a couple of sisters, a mum and dad, all very happy family. My dad was in the marine business. He manufactured auxiliary outboard brackets, which he designed his own system. He also repaired and imported McCulloch and Tohatsu outboards. So we always had a boat. The first time I think I ever went tobogganing was about 1973 in Lyell Bay in Wellington. Me and a couple of mates knocked one together in the garage, but the boat was so slow we had to make it float, and we all got a turn each and it sunk. But that was probably my first sort of boarding behind a boat, and then my dad bought us a proper toboggan, and when we went on holiday we'd tow each other around on that, although my dad used to get carried away and sort of hit 40 mile an hour while you're standing on a toboggan. Is actually pretty dangerous, but that's probably where it all started. And it's probably around that 14 to 15 year old, I was already into water skiing and slalom skiing, but probably mostly those sort of things. This is my favourite shirt, straight out of Ruawai. It's very cool. I got it from the fish and chip shop in Ruawai, which is the only actually active shop there is in Ruawai. Yeah, so my first experience of the mountain and skiing was a pretty horrific day, really. A friend of mine, Peter Kennedy, we're in school holidays, I think we were about 13, so it was about 1973, very kindly offered to take me up to Ruapehu, up to Whakapapa, and my mother had absolutely no idea. So I turn up in leather school shoes and jeans and a t-shirt and a big woolly jumper, and they hired me some gear, but I remember even before I started, my shoes had shrunk and frozen to my feet, and I was in all manner of pain and agony. It was a very cold day, but that was pretty much the start. So I did quite a bit of skiing off and on, but then really started when I started in the ski industry in 1984, when I got a job at Challenger Sports in Taupo. Yeah, so I'd taken a brief stint in Australia, like all young people, from 1979 to 1983 to make my fortune, and went over there with about $5,000, came home with a Fred Williams water ski and about $250. But I had a great time in Australia, but it wasn't really for me, and I actually loved being back in Taupo. Started selling cars and having a great time with all my new sales skills I'd learnt selling door-to-door in Australia. Unfortunately, my dad passed away in 1984 from cancer, and it got me pretty hard. I was very attached to my dad, and at the time the old car lot wasn't really the place, and a nice guy I'd got to know, Bruce Bartley, who owned a sports store called Challenger Sports, offered me a job for roughly half the pay I'd been currently earning. So I took that and started in the sports shop, in the sports industry, and I think late 84, maybe it was early 85. Yeah, so I worked pretty much as the manager of Challenger Sports for 3 years, which at the time seemed like a long time. We were the official importers of Burton snowboards, the first importers of Burton snowboards for New Zealand. My first day was on the Burton Cruise 165 with Graham Dunbar, who's, most people in the snowboard industry know him, and that was his first day as well. We shared that together. He was a lot better than me then, as he is now. Yes, so Graham Dunbar and I, we experimented with marijuana that night, and he was he was only about 17, and he was sitting with his snowboard on and his Sorels, and we'd already read somewhere and we'd put ski higher boot inners inside the Sorels so they were more stable. And we had our snowboards on in the lounge, and he was jumping off the couch onto the floor and trying to do a 180, and sitting in front of the TV pretending he's being interviewed, and all so excited, but we hadn't actually ridden one yet at all. But and that first day was sheet ice, and we were on Hut Flat 1 and 2 and sheet ice, and we were both bleeding at the end of the day because we had no idea. There was no way to learn how to snowboard. There was no YouTube. We had it hard, but Graham Dunbar just never gave up. I mean, he just kept going and going until he's a world-renowned, pretty much, snowboarder. So.
Yeah.
With snowboarding, skiing, I've done it all. I've done wakeboarding and tried the kiteboarding. I've always loved them all. Never been particularly good at any of them, but that's just how I am, really. I like to be able to do all these things, enjoy all these things, but I think for personally, the day I decided to not try and be the best at any of them was the day I really actually started to enjoy the sports, but that's just me. Challenger Sports, before Challenger Sports imported Burton snowboards, they literally did not exist in New Zealand. I mean, there may have been someone else importing some snowboards, but no one knew about it. Yeah. And when we turned up on the hill with a snowboard, it was, what is that thing? Can you stop? How do you turn? Can you go up a lift on it? It was, people were amazed. And Challenger, we're a ski shop, we're a windsurf, so it was a ski shop and a windsurf shop, so I did a lot of windsurfing. So that is me in my Killer Loop one-piece suit, moments before detonation is the suit, with the Burton, the Burton Cruise 165 snowboard, I'm pretty sure that was. Well, that may have been an M6. No, that particular snowboard was a bit later. That was at the Powderhorn. That was possibly about 89. I worked at the Powderhorn for 3 winters as the manager there, and that was the M6 asymmetric sort of free ride board, not the race board, but the free ride board. And that was a beautiful snowboard of the day that rode beautifully. But, you know, it was all about carving and going fast at that point, not so much freestyle. That the whole industry kind of turned freestyle after that. I was at the Powderhorn for 3 winters, and in the summers I was working at Windscene, a windsurf shop in Auckland, selling windsurfers, because I've also had a big history of windsurfing. I started the Taupo board sailing club in the 80s. Used to race, you know, against Bruce Kendall and Barbara Kendall and Wendy Kendall, who no one knows about. And they all used to go screaming past me like I was standing still, because once again, I was quite good at windsurfing, but never great. I used to go a bit of wave sailing. I've been, you know, done lots of windsurfing all over the place, all over the country. And I actually miss windsurfing quite a bit. So my last season at the Powderhorn, I met someone down there, and we won't talk about all that side of me, but I ended up moving to Auckland with that young person, and pretty much have never left. So I was at the end of my last summer at Windscene. Me and the boss at Windscene had always looked down the road, and there was this little shop called the Windsurf Shop, and we always got annoyed because he seemed to sell all the Bic windsurfers, and we'd have just spoken to some people about a Bic windsurfer, and then half an hour later we'd see them driving off from the windsurf shop with the new Bic windsurfer, and my boss was convinced he was a discount merchant. But later I was to discover he was just cleverer than us, and that's Earl Berry, and that's where Ballistics' story starts. One day, after the summer was over, I got a message from Earl Berry offering me his business called the Windsurf Shop for a pretty humble sum of money. And I replied and said, sorry Earl, as much as I'd love to go in business on my own and have my own windsurf shop, I don't have anywhere near that much money. And then he sent me another message and said, how about you just give me half of that, and we'll be business partners. And I replied and said, well, that'd be a great idea. I've got about a third of that amount, And he replied with, "That'll do." So that summer, Earl and I traded with this tiny weeny amount of money in the account and about $8,000 of stock. And we cranked out about 250 grand of sales in 3 months. Paid all the bills, and we had about $12,000 left in credit in the account. And at that point, I said to him, "We need our own premises." We were currently just sharing some space in another building. And the name of the business sucks. We need a new name. And I came up with the name Ballistics. While sitting in my home, a friend called by and they'd been windsurfing and they went, "It was going ballistic out there." And I instantly said, "Ballistics, as long as it doesn't mean bomb, we're in." And it doesn't. It's the science of projectiles and the effects of atmosphere against that projectile once it's been launched. Perfect. It's every snowboarder, wakeboarder travelling through space is all about ballistics. So pretty happy with the name. So we moved across the street, leased our own premises, and the 12 grand we had was spent on $2,000 for the new lightbox sign, about a couple of grand for the roller security door, a couple of grand for carpet, and I think the rest went on a counter and various stands made by my friend Peter from Custom Chambers. He built us some metal racks to hold clothes. We pretty much spent the whole 12 grand setting up our little tiny store, and then just ordered up a storm for a product with absolutely no money in the account, which is pretty much how we carried on from there. Yeah, so Earl and I chugged away for, I think, around the first 12 months and started to really do well. And I talked him into letting me order a few snowboards. And I think the first winter we sold about 45 snowboards, which back then was a pretty good hit. We had some fierce competition from possibly the coolest shop that's ever existed in Auckland, which was the Blue Tile Lounge. For anyone old enough to remember that shop, that was the definition of cool. It was just an experience going in there. Simon and his wife that ran it, they did body piercings as well as sell the snowboards. They were very cool and very interesting couple. They had 2 kinds of airwalk boots for sale, which everyone was very impressed with the range. It was a very cool place, and so I battled with that when I took over the shop from Earl after that 12 months, because he was more interested in a seasonal business, and he used to like to take off to Germany in the winters. And so I took over the business and had the business on my own for about the next 4 years. But
What years are we talking?
we're talking from about 92 to about 96. I think it was just solely me. I may have those years slightly out of kilt. But we went full on. We had naked humans oil painted all over the floor, fully naked men and women all over the floor. We had our airline chairs covered in purple fabric. We had TVs hanging from the wall. We were trying our best to. We used to have Space Invader machines in there, trying to keep a feeling that the place was, had a vibe and a soul, and wasn't just another, sort of corporate-looking mall shop. And it's not that easy to do. It's quite a challenge to keep that, but I think we did a pretty good job. And then, of course, I had a few years there where I started to drop the handle a bit and focus too much on other things. And lucky enough for me, I'd employed this young, highly educated, bright young man who'd... He knew pretty much everything. His name was Justin Hamlin, and I'd employed him. And probably at one of my weaker moments, I woke up one day and he was suddenly my business partner. And to be fair, he worked hard and he was very focused, which I have never been focused on anything pretty much ever. And for the next at least 12 months, we had to thin out our staff, and the two of us worked very hard to get the company as close as possible as we could back on the rails. And by the way, one of the most favourite things I've ever owned in my life, including all my motorcycles, all my boats, one of the favouriteest things I've ever owned is that pair of jeans. They are hot tuna monkey drum jeans. And I would pay $1,000 for another new pair of those right now. I fucking rocked in those jeans. Yeah. Well, the history of boats and ballistics. The first ballistics boats, let's say boats, because I got a little dementia going on here and I may have it wrong, but we had a little ply-light cheetah, I think it was called, which was about a 15'6" little cool little retro runabout. It was actually the smaller model than the Panther, Ply-Light Panther, but the little one. Very cute boat with a 90 Mariner, and we're off up Green High screaming around behind that trying to jump the wake. It's like, when I think back, and there's some ugly photos in there actually of me looking really horrible.
Thinking you were doing great.
Oh, terrible. Just with the little bungee bindings and the little pointy boards, and fun though, great fun. And then we had the famous River Rat, which was a V8 tiny little jet boat, which cost an absolute fortune and was nothing but trouble. But
that had a pedal accelerator.
A pedal accelerator, but it did have a benefit for winter wakeboarding. The water cooling system, the exit came straight out the tail of the boat, so you could hop in the water behind the deck and have this near 40-degree water pouring straight down your wetsuit. So that was the only good point. But because it was a jet, the pole would pull the boat over all over the place. It was terrible. So that was a terrible boat. Yes, I crashed into the mangroves with a boatload full of people because it stalled. I thought it'd be fun to go towards the mangroves at 50 mile an hour and then suddenly at the last minute burn away from them. But when I turned the steering wheel, I buttoned off, and when I hit the throttle, the motor just stopped. So we went screaming straight into the mangroves, and I yelled out, "Duck!" And everyone ducked, and the whole boat was full of bits of mangrove, but no one was injured, and it took us about 2 hours to push it back out, and then it wouldn't start. But enough about the River Rat, all right? That was a shit boat. Then we had a nice old, or it might have been before that, a nice really old Bayliner with the 4-cylinder stern drive. Yeah. And there was the crappy little 2.4 motor. Mm-hmm. But man, we somehow loaded that up. We did shoots for like Auckland Eye magazine with doing flips and tearing past, we got in trouble probably, past oil tankers in the harbour, like right past big ships, doing flips next to the ships, like really close to them. And like we used to have a good fun with that boat, considering it was a pretty crappy boat. Yeah. And then I think from memory, it could have been the Daryl McFarlane tucked us in to the brand new 40th anniversary V8 20-foot Bayliner. Yeah. Fucking Darwood, I think it was Darwood. Yeah. That was when we met him pretty much, Daryl McFarlane. Yeah. I think it was Daryl that sold us that boat. Yeah, and he swiped us a stainless steel prop for it. And those were the days we started even manufacturing our own poles, wakeboard poles, and they were called Pervert Air. I thought that was a great name, Pervert, vertical. Mikey Havoc broke our Pervert Air pole. I did buy the front tie-down strap from the warehouse, I'm just saying. And then I think after that, we went straight to the top of the class and we started importing Malibu wake setters from Australia. And then I still remember the absolute excitement of the first time that Jay and I had two boats. And we'd bought another second-hand Malibu, and we had the shed out the back with the two wakeboard boats. And man, if you hear the expression, those were the days, well, man, those were the days. It was, and then once we had two brand new Malibus, you'd go down to the river, they were all sign written. We'd got this incredible sponsorship deal from Lion Breweries for Corona, which later was to have a detrimental effect on my health. But they were giving us 4,500 bottles of beer every year.
4,500 bottles of beer every year.
Plus a whole lot of cash, and all our boats were sign written Corona, with all the limes all over them in Corona. And those were the days. We were having a lot of fun. We were running the wakeboard camp, which we started, quite a unique camp. It's another Daryl McFarlane story, because we had already discussed the possibility of how great it would be to have like a proper wakeboard camp where people went and we could teach them how to wakeboard. And I think Daryl McFarlane said to me one day, "Oh, Archie Murray's the place, it's a really cool place. And the houses are cheap and blah, blah, blah." And not long after that, I was on my CB650 Honda, classic bike, coming back from Taupo, visiting my mum or something. And I thought, "Oh, Archie Murray." And I went in there and had a look, and sure enough, there was a couple of little houses for sale in Monowai Drive, or whatever it is. And they were asking $35,000 each. So, yeah, we got the first one, bought the first little green one. I can't even remember why we decided that one. It was smaller, but I think it was in better condition. And we set up and we started to have a few camps, and we were very lucky. We were getting these Japanese groups from a school in Japan booking the beginning of every summer, which was, they'd be spending about $12,000 or so for a week for them. So that was a kick-off to sort of cover the initial costs every summer of the camp. Camp never really made any money, but it did kind of cover its ass, and it was just a beautiful, wonderful part of our lives. I don't think either of us really cared much if it made any money or not. It was just a neat thing, the vibe of it, the fact we could go there ourselves, enjoy it. It was really cool having the camp. We had the sponsorship from Corona, which also helped kind of jack it up, keep it alive. After about a year, we suddenly heard one day that the lovely family who had won Telly Bingo, and that's how they bought their little other house. They'd gone broke and had to sell it. And the lady said to me it was for sale for $35,000 and that it was in very poor condition and it had been left open and the local kids had been in there and making holes in the walls. And I just said, "Well, I'd like to offer $32,000 for the house, please." She said, "Oh no, you really need to see it. It's in bad condition." And I went, "You're not listening to me. I'd like to buy the house." And I really had to argue with the real estate agent. And so we got the house for $32,000, the second one. And, we turned up. There's a bit of gravel on the carpet and a hole in the wall. It's like, wasn't a big deal. And man, what a dream. Like, we put a deck out the back, built a big skyline garage, had the hot tubs, had the big super trampoline. The second house had a gorgeous backyard with beautiful trees. The whole thing was magnificent. People turning up there. We had the two big trucks, the two boats, signage around the backyard. They were just super excited, and people had a wonderful time, wonderful memories. I still get people now coming in now saying, "Oh my God, I went to your camp. It was amazing." It was just neat to be part of something so positive and so much fun as that. And the area itself, wakeboarding down there like Lake Artimuri and Oakuri, you got hot pools, natural hot springs. The whole thing was just very few places like it in the world. In fact, the funny thing is when I did finally once go to Florida and famous wakeboard camp, besides the fact they had probably epic instructors and facilities, it paled in comparison to what we actually had to offer, I think, as far as location. We had many famous riders. Most of the world's best wakeboarders of the era stayed at our camp. Just about all the Australians and Americans you can think of that were in the magazines back then and what have you, all stayed there, and they all just signed the wall. It was a shame we couldn't have taken one of the walls with us because it was all signed. And attached to the camp was quite a bit of sadness as well, because we had some tragedies happen to a couple of our team riders, Richard Wells and Mark Kenny, who both passed away tragically through absolutely no just tragic events. Were both pretty much very, very closely associated with us, and very dearly missed both of them. Both of them fantastic people and wakeboarders. So Mark Kenny was only a young little cheeky Australian teenager. He was, personally for me, he was the most impressive wakeboarder I've ever seen of any. He could have a 40-minute set and he would not repeat a trick. He would angrily throw the handle down into the wake and then just somehow bend down and pick it up again. I don't know. I don't know how he did it. He would just go roaring in and then just leap around and jump over the rope somehow. When we turned around in the boat at the end, he wouldn't just do a trick on the turn. He would do a flip as you turned, and then if there's another boat going past, he'd do another flip on that wake as he went out. And while he was doing flips and inverts, he'd give you the finger and poke his tongue out while he was in the middle of a complex invert. Personally, when I'm trying to do an invert or doing an invert, I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea where I am. I'm in a dizzy state of confusion, and every now and then I'll land one. But Mark Kenny certainly knew exactly where he was when he did the tricks. He was incredible to watch. So we had the Artiamuri camp for about 3 or 4 years. Can't exactly remember. And Jay and I got wind of a property for sale next to Iraqi Karako on the Waikato River further towards Taupo. It's a very geothermal area. We went and had a look, 50 acres, sort of waterfront, but not super easy to get down to the water, but you could walk down to the water. Had its own hot water bore and a big shed. It was lovely to have the farm, though, I've got to say. We had beautiful hot tubs overlooking the river. You'd sit out there at midnight. There was no lights within 20 miles. It was stars. The location was spectacular. And the water, once you got the boat in the water, far more options for flat water. You could take people straight to the hot pool, to sit in the hot pool. There was all sorts of great features there. But overall, it just was a bit harder to run the camp there, and then we subdivided the whole farm into 3 sections, and we were set to make quite a lot of money, and we would have ended up with our own camp freehold. But unfortunately, we missed the boat, and the whole land value, rural land value, and everything crashed at that point, and we just climbed out with the skin of our teeth, basically. Didn't turn out too bad. Kind of a relief getting rid of all that and all the financial burden of all that and all the fancy boats and things. I did miss having that wonderful vibe and that culture going on around the camp. It was one up on the Blue Tile Lounge. Having the camp was as real as you can get. When you say you're in an industry, something like that really connects you with the industry. We were also, of course, this is something we haven't even talked about. I mean, Jay was a big part of this, helping organise just about every major wakeboard event in New Zealand for several years was organised by basically Ballistics, or with the help of Gavin Broadbent and others. We organised the national events. The first ever Ballistics, by the way, wakeboard camp before we owned a property was at the Spectacle Lakes, and that was hilarious. And that was pretty much just about 30 guys, and I think the second night 2 young girl school teachers turned up, and man, were they popular. Jay thought it was funny for us to eat nothing but sausages and have nothing but Lion Red big bottles to drink. So for about 4 days, Justin would come out and go in the morning, "Richard, do you fancy a lovely sausage for breakfast?" And it just became a thing. And everyone just thought it was funny as shit, because that's all we were eating was sausages and bread, and even for breakfast having a lovely bottle of Lion Red with our sausage. But that was fun. We had a fun time at that camp. That was bloody good. I think that was with the early Bayliner. Yeah. That one. Yeah. About 2007, I can't even remember if we advertised for another worker or whether he just wandered in, but this guy called Dean wandered in. Was he wearing Crocs? He was a different species to us. In fact, I'm still unsure if he's actually a human or from some other galaxy. He walked in and he applied for a job. He just bowled on up very confidently and had his resume. And Jay and I interviewed him, and then we had a good talk afterwards, and it was just like, well, obviously we're going to employ him. That's just kind of obvious, but different to people we'd experienced before. But it was just overwhelmingly obvious to both of us that we needed to employ him. I can't even really put my finger on what it was, but it wasn't a mistake. And he's evidently still lurking around ballistics to this day. Yeah, so Dean had been with us about a year or so when Jay and I realised that we needed to make sure he didn't run away. I think he started hinting about other opportunities, so we made him a minor partner at that point in time and sold him a few shares or gave him a few shares, I can't even remember. And that was great. 3 of us involved. I think it was really great moving forward. We unanimously would end up making some pretty good decisions about everything. The only problem was, of course, once you get 3 people involved as like directors, in my opinion, it did tend to sometimes dull down ideas a bit. Once everyone has their input, you end up with maybe a bit more vanilla flavoured idea than the probably just crazy ideas I wanted at the time. And the other thing, of course, is costs-wise for a small retail business, it became quite a costly affair. So as a couple of years went past, we kind of all realised that maybe one of us had to go, and maybe that should be the decrepit old bastard that didn't know how to attach a photo to an email, and, you know, the one that was always wandering off up Barry's Point Road looking at motorcycles. So I actually had a pretty hideous incident where I fainted in Point Chev kiteboarding and floating around in the drink wondering where I was, and then later discovered I had colon cancer. So on the good note is I recovered from that brilliantly, but I also decided I needed to change. I needed a less stressful environment at this point, and so I left ballistics, and Dean and Jay became equal and 50-50 partners, which was a great result for them, both being far more full of energy at this point, younger and more focused. I think they pretty much haven't looked back since then. And I wandered off and decided to be like maybe a cab driver or something. But within a couple of weeks, it's amazing how energised you become. And, you know, I came up with some new ideas of my own. Yeah, so it's now 2021. It's close to 10 years since I left the building. And to my delight, I still walk into ballistics at least once a week probably. I still absolutely feel like part of the crew. I'll find myself adjusting the clothing on the racks. There's always someone to make me a coffee. And I think the thing I appreciate most is that no matter how new a staff member might be in that place, they all seem to know who I am and all respect that I was part of the team, and I always feel like part of the team still. Always get invited to the Christmas parties, and that is very special to me, and it is a wonderful, warm feeling that I still feel part of the place, because it's still family. Nice, some warm fuzzies.